Hey there everyone, we're going to take a look at adding two more components into our mechanical animal assembly. In this case, we're going to be looking at the dolphin. Uh, Next one we're going to take a look at is going to be adding a follower in. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch. The way that this sits is I'm actually going to have it where I'm going to hide the stand here, and I'm going to create a sketch actually right on the inside edge of the crank. So I'm going to go ahead and create that there. And if we need to, we can hide some things like the axle washer and even the pivot and the washer. So I'm going to base a lot of this geometry based off of the crank. So that follower kind of has a ring that fits over this particular point. So I'm going to go ahead and create a center diameter circle. And again, we might pick up a few other center points. I'm going to go ahead and draw this a little bit larger so it's a little easier to see. And we're going to see some of the geometry that kind of goes on. The diameter of this, we're going to start on the inner circle of the follower, which is going to be 1.29. Now, the other thing that might happen is we want to make sure this is going to be right there, and you can kind of see as I drag the center point, it picked up the center point of that circle right there. Perfect. It's exactly what we want to happen. So when I draw my next one, I'm going to kind of go out a little bit more, and I want to just kind of go out beyond that a little bit. And at this point, I do want to kind of hide the crank. So I'm going to create the geometry for this particular shape. Now, on the drawings, it gives a radius. So, and the reason why that is because there's actually a connected rectangle, which I'm going to go ahead and draw in right here. And the reason why we get a radius there is because we're going to trim away the inner parts of this circle. And let me undo this here just a little bit more. Here we go. And we can go through and get a little bit more of this geometry to show up. I'm going to do a horizontal vertical constraint. I'm going to hold my shift key, grab the center point of this top line, choose the center of our circle there. You're going to see it kind of matches the midpoint. And at this particular case, you know, you're going to see like this little kind of scenario kind of going on with our sketch. So I'm actually going to extend this line down, and I'm going to trim away this stuff that's kind of getting in the way. Okay. So there's kind of our follower. I'm going to dimension. This is going to be a 0.25. So that'll kind of work that way. The height of this, 1.75. So that might mess with our circle, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and make this, our radius is showing up, so I'm going to go 0.775. And that really kind of constrains our sketch. So we're in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and finish the sketch. Then I'm going to extrude. Now, if it goes to try to grab, like you'll notice it's not quite, and what it's doing is it's referencing that crank. So I'm going to grab this portion too. And if we want to turn some stuff back on, like on the crank, notice the direction's going correctly, and we're going to be going to 0.25 there. It's going to try to make it red because it thinks we're joining it to the crank. We don't want that. We want a new component. So there's where it turns gray. There we can kind of see how it fits onto the crank. And then I can go ahead and say okay. I'm going to name this the follower. And let's go ahead and throw some new material as well as a new appearance on this. Okay, we'll toggle on these other components. That way you can kind of see how it all fits in the grand scheme of things with your assembly. So you can also tell the way it's modeled also fits right through the hole on the pivot. So we're good to go. And let's not forget our axle washer. There we go. So all of that is looking good. So our next component here is going to be the dolphin. So the dolphin in this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and rotate this to the back, and we're going to toggle off the pivot and some of these other components, except for our follower, because it's going to rest on, and going to be positioned on top of our follower. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch. And in this case, actually, what I want to do is, since this is going to be centered right on top of the follower, I'm going to create a midplane between the two faces on our follower. And I'm going to create my sketch right on that midplane. So what I like to do in this scenario is I like to set up kind of like an outline for how big roughly I want this to be. So I'm going to go through and just kind of sketch a little bit of a rectangle. On our drawing, the height of our dolphin is about 0.635 and the width of it is 1.62. And roughly, we could go through and use the origin. We could make sure that this thing's going to be centered. Let me grab the midpoint here to the origin. And as far as the height goes, let's go ahead and have this thing be, I think the whole depth that we're looking for is roughly about maybe 1/4 of an inch. So, and that's really kind of what we're looking for. So I'm going to now insert, and I'm going to pull in canvas, and I'm going to grab the image of a dolphin just to kind of give me a little bit of an outline. And it says that I need to click the work plane, so I'm going to select it. I'm going to drag this image up here, and let's flip it. So, and I can resize to make this kind of fit inside of the box roughly. That looks pretty good. And also I'm going to position it so that way that a good portion of the body is going to be on top of the follower there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and say okay. From here I can go through and go to create, and so here actually is my sketch. So let me go ahead and say edit the sketch. You're going to notice that if you you have a situation like this on the timeline, I'm going to drag this picture to be before the sketch, and then when I go back into there, now it exists. So if anything like that ever happens, it's an easy fix. I can go into spline, and I want fit point spline, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go around until go around grabbing various points. Let me start here at the tail, and just going until I finally get, a good amount. Now on this line you can kind of see trying to make that bend doesn't really work for us, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit the green check mark and say okay, and I can just repeat the fit point spline, start off of that end, and continue to kind of go around. So when you're using the spline, that can kind of happen, especially as you're making turns and curves. For just like here, as I get into the fin, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go through and do this. Same kind of scenario. Just kind of start a new spline there and just make sure I connect off of the previous one. And again, we're just trying to get an outline. Okay, once I have this outline, I can go ahead and select OK. What I would recommend is to make sure that you don't have to worry about this. I'm going to grab these lines out here, and I'm going to toggle these to construction lines, just so that way it helps give me something. And then I can go ahead and go through and just say, all right, let's finish the sketch. So I can toggle off the canvas so I don't see that anymore. I'm going to extrude. Let's do a symmetric extrusion, and it's going to be 0.35. We want to make sure it's a whole length of 0.35. And we're going to see it's going to want to try to cut that. We don't want to cut it. We want to create a new component on top of the follower. And we can go ahead and say OK. So this new component is going to be named Dolphin. And the other thing we want to do is, just to reference what we've got going on, I'm going to go ahead and pull a offset plane from the YZ plane. I'm going to drag it up to roughly to where I'm right underneath kind of the belly, which looks pretty good, of this dolphin. And I'm going to just say OK. I'm going to create a new sketch on that work plane. And what's going to happen here is, what I would like to do is reference, which I'm going to go ahead and pull from the project options. I want to reference the edges of this particular follower. So you can see some of that kind of comes into play. It looks like that might be the one. And what I'm going to do from that is I'm going to hide the follower. And here you get kind of a little bit of an outline of where that square opening is going to be at. And if we need to, I can do this little scenario. Take a line, make an X. I can toggle these guys to construction lines. And I can draw a center rectangle, which is going to be an opening of 0.27 by 0.27. So we want this to be a little bit of a snug fit on top of the follower. I'm going to finish the sketch. From here I can extrude, grab that rectangle. If you go through and do have a line, I might want to make sure you grab all of it. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this up into the dolphin so that way it fits onto our part. And again, about, if you did 0.25, that'd be pretty tall into there. So you can always kind of eyeball this. Again, like maybe even a point, maybe in a 0.2 would just work fine. Just enough to give it there, to get it to where it'll sit on top of the follower. I can say OK. So there's the opening. If I toggle my follower back on, there it is, right there on top of there, which is exactly what we want. Let's change the material for our dolphin and the appearance. This one, I'm going to kind of duplicate a red, and let me edit this. We're going to go ahead and change this over to pink, just something to make it look a little bit more like what we've got 3D printed. And there we go. Here's our stand and all of our parts. Here's our dolphin ready to go. Now we are ready to start to animate this thing, which we'll cover in the next video.